All right, everybody. Thank you for tuning in today. You are listening to WRUU-LP Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings Community Radio with Global Soul. And here is Sebastian Messer playing live for us on The Adam Messer Show. Thanks a lot, Bass. I really enjoy when you play on the show, man. It's just a lot of fun. And I'm bragging. This is my son and all, but I love having you play live music on the show. And everybody, thank you so much for tuning in. If you're just now joining us, we have a very special guest. His name is Mark Allan Gunnells, and from first hour or so, we were talking, and we were just wrapping it up, talking a little bit about horror movies and stuff like that. But Mark Allan Gunnells loves to tell stories. And this is his bio off of his Amazon author page. So he has since he was a kid penning one-page tales that were Twilight Zone knockoffs. He likes to think that he's gotten a little bit better since then. He loves reader feedback, and above all, he loves telling stories. He lives in Greer, South Carolina, with his husband, Craig A. Metcalf. And welcome back, Mark. Thank you so much for being here on the show with me today.
Happy to still be here.
Yeah. Oh, it's been nice. I actually enjoy. You were talking like right before we broke off for the 3 o'clock to the 4 o'clock hour changeover. You're talking about how you like a slow burn, kind of like a build up in the horror stories that you enjoy. Could you give me a couple of examples like of some stories that you have enjoyed that are like a good slow burn like that?
Well, when it comes to like horror movies, which is what I really grew up on even before I discovered horror literature, my absolute favorite horror movie is John Carpenter's Halloween.
Oh yeah.
And to me, like, that is a perfect example of a slow burn. Like, you go through a lot of the early part of the movie just getting to know the characters, and the tension and the suspense starts to build before all the mayhem starts. Because, to me, if I tune into a horror movie and it's just, action from the get-go, my mind is like, who are these people?
Mm-hmm.
Like, who are these people this is happening to? So I actually love, like, I can read a book. Recently I read a book by Sarah Pinborough. I'm not sure if you're familiar with her. She has an excellent book called Behind Her Eyes. I think everyone should read. But I was reading her most recent book, which was called Dead to Her. And, I was at the halfway point of that book, and I thought, the main plot of this book hasn't even kicked in yet. It's not that nothing was happening. It's just like the main plot of, where things really start to escalate hadn't happened. I was mostly getting to know the characters. We were having bits and pieces happening that were like stepping stones, just ratcheting up that suspense one piece at a time. But that's the kind of horror I like. That horror where you lead up to it so that it means more when it happens, because you know the people involved, you're rooting for them, you really feel like you're inside the story and not sort of just watching it from the outside.
Mm-hmm. So you feel like you're right there participating in the story versus observing it.
Yeah, because, I can read a book sometimes and I'm like, I can appreciate technical aspects of it, but I feel like they haven't put me in that story.
Right.
I'm just sort of watching it through glass, which can be entertaining, but it's not as an immersive experience as when they make me feel like I know those characters, I know that place. Like they make it that real that it feels like it's happening around you.
Yeah. With your writing, do you try to model that with your storytelling?
I mean, it's definitely my goal. I want character to be very important in my stories. I want you to be able to feel like you know who that person is, whether it's the characters you're supposed to love, the characters you're supposed to hate. I want you to understand them, how their minds work. So I would say I'm probably very character oriented because I feel like if the characters aren't real, if you can't grab onto the characters, then the story isn't going to work as well. You may have a great plot, but if it's just paper thin characters who feel like they're just existing to move the plot forward, it's to me not going to be as effective as if the plot is driven by who the characters are as opposed to the character just being game pieces that you move around for the plot.
More mechanized than humanized, right? Kind of like just robotic scene to scene. I know what you mean because I've seen that before too.
And I mean, that's definitely how I work. Like, I live for that moment where I get to a point where I thought I knew what was going to happen next, but because of the way that character has developed, I'm like, that doesn't make sense anymore. That character wouldn't do that. And I'm not going to force that character to do that because that was my idea of where the story needed to go.
Mm-hmm.
I will adjust the story to follow what the character would do. And it's not always easy to explain that to people because it sounds very abstract and like sort of up in the air. But like there is a moment where if I do my job right, the characters have such distinct personalities that they will tell me like, I would never do this.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so you can't make me do this. So
yeah, they take on their own life, and
yeah,
they really. I mean, I know it sounds kind of crazy. I know what you're saying with that, but they take on their own life. They have their own personalities. I mean, they're as real as they can be without having a corporal form. Without actually physically having a body. And I think, it's kind of interesting because I think of method acting when I think of those kinds of characters. Because like you said, if you're working with them long enough, they're going to say, hey, no, this isn't me, versus like maybe an obscure character. That's just kind of like somebody who's there, but you don't do a lot of character development with, right? Yeah, it is. Yeah. I think it's interesting, especially the way that they can take on their own life, and they'll lead you down, and they'll say, this is what I want to do, and you're like, oh, okay.
And, everybody works differently, but that's just how I work, and I feel like sometimes if I get some feedback from a reader who liked one of my books, and they're like, I loved it because I didn't know where it was going, and I can be like, well, I didn't know where it was going. Like, it did not end the way that I thought it was going to end when I started, because I try not to lead the story. I try to let the story lead me.
Mm-hmm.
And I love when I've written some books. I have a novel called Sequel, which is like my homage to the slasher films I grew up on, and one called The Quarry. And I have one coming out later this year called 324 Abercorn, where I have supporting characters that end up more important to the story than I thought they were going to be. Like, I put them in there for a specific person, for a specific purpose, but they grew beyond that purpose and surprised me, like realizing they had different layers to them that actually I wanted to explore, and then that actually informs the story and sort of changes its trajectory because I didn't know that character was going to become so important to it.
I had that happen with a character named Greg from the Bloodthirsty series, because he was the character that people gave me the most feedback that they liked. And I was I was kind of surprised because, I just had him in there kind of like as the, he wasn't like he was one of the main characters, but he wasn't the main, the main character. But he was the one that people liked because he was kind of like that, the bad guy, anti-hero type or whatever. Kind of snarky, a little. He's like really, he's like 800 years old and he's seen it all and done it all, and whatever. And so in the second book, he was actually the main character, and
Yeah.
you kind of we kind of go through this whole thing with him, and the situation he gets into. And I had the same experience with stuff that I was writing that he's like, I wouldn't say it like that. I'm like, okay. So it kind of
Yeah.
I had different plot points that I wanted to hit, but the in between, from one scene to the next, how they got there just kind of took it, its own little road to get there.
And I feel like as a reader, I can sometimes read a book and I can tell like that choice that character just made is completely out of character, and they only did it because if they didn't do it, then the plot couldn't go forward in the way that it is.
Mm.
And I feel like that's a writer who didn't listen to his or her character. And I like, that is my favorite part of the experience. Like when I was writing that novel I mentioned, Sequel, like it's about the making of a horror movie.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a character named Leilani who was a pop singer that they put in the movie. And she was there to be, one, comic relief, and two, just to be a thorn in one of my other characters' side.
Mm-hmm. Like a little troublemaker?
And that was, what's that?
Like a little troublemaker?
Yeah, like, she was just, stirring the pot.
Mm-hmm.
And that was really all I saw her as. And I still remember there was a specific scene that I was writing, and she was having a conversation with someone I'd never really had her interact with in the book before. And as I was writing that scene, and it was just flowing naturally, she started to reveal things about herself that gave her a different dimension. And I realized, like, for all of that, there's, like, a certain sweetness to her. And it really did. It changed my perception of that character. And as I explored that, she took on a bigger role in the book. And, like, I love it. I love when, like, and it sounds crazy, but, like, I was writing a novella of mine called Fort one time, and I was, like, halfway through it, and I was taking a shower thinking about it, and I suddenly realized, oh, that character I thought was going to be there at the end is going to die.
Mm.
And it never occurred to me before that. Like, I just envisioned them at the end, but I'm like, no, they're not going to be there.
That actually happened to me yesterday while I was writing.
Yeah.
It's so crazy you say that, because that actually happened to me yesterday with this new series, and I was writing about this character, and it just struck me as like, okay, well, I kind of knew what was going to happen with the scenes. Like I said, having a plot point, I didn't know what would happen, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is how all of this kind of falls in on itself, because this one character dies. And so I was surprised. I was kind of like, whoa, this is, I don't necessarily like it, but that's kind of like what the story is saying. Hey, this is what's going to happen.
Yeah, and sometimes it is painful to kill off a character that you like, but if the story calls for it, and it's funny, like in that case, when I realized that, it solved some story issues that I wasn't sure how I was going to resolve, almost like, it always needed to be that way. And, sometimes, like I said, later this year, I have a book coming out called 324 Abercorn, which is actually there in Savannah. But there were a couple of characters where I knew they were going to be in a situation where they could possibly get killed, but I didn't know. Like, I didn't know, like, are they going to survive it? Are they not? And I just made the conscious decision, like, I'm going to wait till I'm writing that scene and just see what happens. Like, I'm not going to try to decide beforehand, like, what their fate is going to be. I'm just going to get to that scene, write it, and then see if they're still standing.
hold that thought. Let me do a station ID real quick. Everybody, you're listening to WRUULP Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings Community Radio with Global Soul. I'm glad that you brought that up because I, in February, I did kind of like a NaNoWriMo personal challenge for myself, but I didn't do 50,000 words. I wanted to do a novella because I'm working on a novella for actually Kern Girls Press again. And so I did that little challenge, did 30,000 words in a month. And while I was writing, I had the same thing happen to me. I was like, okay, I don't know what's going to happen with this character or not. I'm just going to, let it go through as I'm writing. And one of the things that I guess just discovery through writing or whatever was this one character, like just basically turned coat on, his friend, and I was kind of shocked. I was like, wow, I didn't see that one coming myself. Have you ever had a moment like that where you're like, wow, it just kind of even shocked you, even though you're the one writing it?
I mean, it really does, and I know people who can't really understand that or believe that because they're like, "You're writing it." I'm like, "Yeah, I am, but I'm writing it with the freedom to be surprised."
Yeah.
Because, and those are my favorite. The surprises are my favorite part. I always say, writing for me is more an act of discovery than creation.
Yeah.
Like, I just get it started, and then, like I said, if I'm doing my job right, it's going to take on its own momentum, and the characters are going to become more fully realized personalities, and then I get it started and just, I mean, I'm still in control at the keyboard, but if I've made them real enough, when I get to a certain point, I will say, I'm saying to myself, what would somebody with that personality do?
Mm-hmm.
If it's not what I need them to do for the story, then they can't do it. So I have to figure out a new direction for the scene to go.
Have you ever written a scene that you really enjoyed, but it didn't fit for the story? It didn't progress the story, and but you enjoyed the scene. Did you ever have that experience? And then what did you do with it?
I did, and I keep going back to this one book, but in that novel I mentioned before, Sequel, I had a scene that it was so much fun to write,
mm-hmm.
and I really loved that scene. And the editor, when I was working on it to get it published, they liked that scene, but it didn't. It really did stop the story
mm-hmm.
in a place where it didn't need to be stopped. And we spent weeks going over that scene, like, what can we do to the scene to make it more relevant and more propulsive for the story? And we were having trouble coming up with anything. And then finally, I called the editor and I was just like, I feel like I have to just admit that as much as we love the scene, we need to just take it out.
Mm-hmm.
Because we can take it out. It doesn't hurt the story. It actually makes the pacing better. And as fun as that scene is, it doesn't add anything to the story.
What I thought about doing with those? You know what I thought about doing with those, Mark? With those kind of scenes? Like speaking of movies, they have like deleted scenes and things like that. I thought about including it as like some of the back matter. And just saying, like, this was a scene that, if I'm not going to use it for a future book or whatever. But I thought about, putting that in there as kind of like a behind-the-scenes type stuff as part of the back matter.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because since that book does revolve around the making of a movie, when it came out and I was promoting it on my blog, I did a thing of deleted scenes. And I put that one in there, and then there were a couple of other shorter scenes I had taken out, and then there was an alternative scene that I had changed in the editing process. So I thought that would be a fun promotional thing to do.
That's so cool.
So I did put the scene out there on my blog for people to read, even though it didn't fit in the published version of the book.
It's interesting because I think folks enjoy like lore, especially when they're into a character or they're into like, a universe or whatever. And I think they like that kind of, this little snippets of stuff. I mean, I know I do. It's just kind of like a little aside or just a little whatever. And I thought about that. I was like, I don't, because there was this one scene that I had, and I was like, I really enjoyed writing it. I loved the scene itself, but it was just a sore thumb in the book, and it's in this one that I've been working on for Chrome Girls Press, and I was thinking, I was like, I, I don't want to just kill it altogether, but it definitely doesn't belong in this story.
Yeah.
And I thought about doing something like like a back matter behind the scenes type thing, and with it, but obviously I'm gonna have to talk with my editor and say, hey, is this something we could do? If not, I might just do it on my blog, too, my website. So
Yeah. I mean, I do that sort of stuff too. Like as a reader, like I love when a short story collection has the story notes at the end
mm-hmm.
that give you a little background on each story and maybe where they got the idea or something interesting about the writing of it. So in some of my collections, I've gotten the publishers to agree to let me do those story notes. But even if the publisher doesn't want to take those pages for that,
Mm-hmm.
when I have a collection, I always do story notes on my blog so people who are interested can sort of get those little behind the scenes details of it.
I think that's so cool. Especially in the world we live in today. I mean, when we were kids, there wasn't all this access to everything instantly, right? Um,
Yeah.
and obviously publishing, I mean, back in the day, man, I remember as a kid, I wanted to write and draw comic books. That was like what I wanted to do. And, it was like, there was no, no way it was going to happen. And, nowadays it's like, okay, if you've got an idea and you're willing to put in the work, you can,
Yeah.
you can publish. Even if, like you were talking about, like the last hour, it took you a little while to find the world of small press. Chrome Girls Press is, Rachel Brune. She's the owner and the operator of the indie press, and but I love working with her, and I love the idea of being published with her because I've met a whole lot of interesting people and authors, and just getting to work with her has been a lot of fun. Um, you have you've got a bunch of work published. What's your favorite part about working with small press and indie press publishing?
I think my favorite part of it is there's a freedom to it. Sometimes because I'm the kind of writer who loves to hear how other writers do it, so I listen to a lot of like author interviews.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll notice even authors who are really successful, like I was listening to a recent interview with Andy Weir, who's most known for the book The Martian, that they made as the Matt Damon movie.
That was self-published too, wasn't it? The Martian?
It was originally self-published on his website
Yeah.
for free.
Yeah.
And now he's, a millionaire. But he was saying,
and he had like Matt Damon, right? So
yeah, made into a Matt Damon movie, directed by Ridley Scott. So I also love stories like that. Like, it can, I mean, it's not going to happen to all of us, and that's why I still do it, because I love it.
Mm-hmm.
But, there are all these people, and, I know, we're never supposed to say anything positive about Stephanie Meyer, but, she's just like a housewife. He's just a guy putting stories up on his website. They don't have, like, connections to the publishing world. Sometimes it happens. But anyway, but I was listening to an interview, and he was talking about the book he's writing now, which wasn't the idea he originally pitched to the publisher. The publisher said, I don't like that idea. Come up with something else. So he said, okay, so I scrapped that idea. To me, like, I can't imagine not writing just whatever I want to write. And, like, to know that you can have something as successful as The Martian, and you still might not get to write the book next that's the one you want to write.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
I'll give an example. I'll give an example of what comes to mind with that. a band, for example, their first album, if a label's behind it, they're gonna put everything they can into that first album, and it's gonna be like, oh, this is like this is who this band is. Second album, they're gonna try to do a repeat of the first album. By the third album, you really get to hear what the band wants to play, right?
Yeah.
Because they've had, if they've had enough success with the first and second album, that third album, it's pretty much like, okay, you've been doing good, so let's hear what you got. And even that, like, I'm just talking, that's like what I saw back in the day. Today, music's totally different, but, with any kind of publisher, I write for the local newspaper here in Savannah, and there are ideas that I'll pitch to my editor that, they'll shoot down and say, no, we're not really going to, run with that, even though it's something I would enjoy writing. And, I guess it's a professional relationship where, you just have to kind of go with what they want to do. But I agree with you, though, on the fact that it is, as an indie publisher or a writer, being able to write about what you want to write about, gives you a lot of autonomy and freedom.
Because, if I get an idea that excites me that is completely different from most of what else I've published so far, I don't worry about it. I just write it, and I know if the publishers I've been working with don't want it, there are a lot of other, because having so many different small presses out there, the focuses can be so different. I'm like, okay, so this isn't the kind of thing that publisher publishes,
Mm-hmm.
but there's this other publisher over there that does like that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like I have complete freedom just to follow any story, and I don't have to try to recreate something that's like something else I've already published.
Yeah. You don't have to repeat the formula, right?
Yeah.
So
to me, it is that freedom that I love the most about the small press.
yeah, I like I like the small press publishing because just we got a few minutes before we have to do the break, but back in 2016, I started this thing called the Savannah Quill here in Savannah, Mark, and the idea was to connect writers and readers to promote literacy. And I hosted a couple of conventions with local authors, and this last year I hosted one called the Savannah Authors Expo at Savannah Coffee Roasters, and then I've also done for the last 2 years hosted this thing called Books and Brews Savannah with local authors and partnering with Southbound Brewing Company here in Savannah, and it was to raise funds for the local Ronald McDonald the charities of the Coastal Empire, and we raised almost like $500 last year, so it was really cool. So I wanted to get into writing and publishing and stuff like that, and I found that I wanted to keep the Savannah Quill stuff separate from like my fiction writing and stuff like that, because I could focus on like the non-profit type of events that I've hosted. So this year, wanting to continue working and publishing, I've got this horror anthology that I'm going to be putting out. But I came up with a small publishing press imprint called Valhalla Books. And the reason why I did that was because I wanted to have a publishing house imprint. I wanted to be able to separate the book imprint from like the Savannah Quill stuff that I do. And I wanted to be able to work with authors and have like like an official little book imprint like every other publishing house has. And it's been interesting because working as an indie author and self-publishing versus working as a publisher and working with other authors as an editor and a publisher, you have to wear a lot of different hats. And I'll give an example right before we go to the break, but the anthology, I had planned on releasing it in May this year, and had the stories lined up, and with everything that's happened with the the COVID-19 pandemic, especially as a new brand, I just made a decision to, say, hey, this is not the best time for us to try to launch a new brand and to try to launch this anthology. What I'm going to do is I'm going to postpone it. And I told the authors, I said, I really am sorry, but you have, if you want to, you have the right and option to, to bow out now, and take your story and publish it yourself or publish it somewhere else if you want to. But I would really rather you stay if you would. And the authors said that they wanted to stay, and I think that goes back to having a relationship. As an author myself, I have a really good relationship with my editor, Rachel Brune, from Chrome Girls Press. And as a publisher, I want to have a good relationship with my authors, and I want to do the best job that I can for them. And I want to serve, them and our audience. With Valhalla Books, the goal for me is to be able to share compelling fiction so that readers enjoy, they love reading again. So we've got to do a station break real quick. Mark will be back in about 2 or 3 minutes. And everybody tuning in, thank you so much. Today, my special guest is Mark Allan Gunnells, and he's a horror writer. And then we'll come back on the second half, and we're going to get more into writing and publishing. And I'd like to really talk about your upcoming projects and stuff like that. And I know you mentioned them a little bit, but I want to kind of dive in a little bit deeper with some of that. Okay.
Okay.
All righty.
Have a chance to support both Savannah Independent Artists and WRUU during this shelter-in-place order to stop the spread of COVID-19. Creatives in Need is a group of independent artists hosted by the Roots Up Gallery, which is collaborating with WRUU during this shelter-in-place to offer an online art gallery at www.rootsupgallery.com. For every work of art sold at this online gallery, the artists receive 80% from the sales and 20% goes to WRUU and its programs like Art on the Air. Interested listeners can go to www.rootsupgallery.com to start shopping today. Voting is now open for Connect Savannah's annual Best of Savannah Readers Poll, and WRUU is once again on the ballot. Last year, you voted us best in the local radio station and talk radio station categories. Continue your support of WRUU 107.5 FM by again voting for us in the Best Local Radio Station and Best Local Talk Radio Station categories. And this year, vote for your favorite WRUU morning program and favorite WRUU host. Voting ends at 11:59 p.m. sharp on Sunday, May 3rd, and results will be revealed the night of Tuesday, May 19th. For details and voting, visit connectsavannah.com. And as always, thank you for listening to, supporting, and voting for WRUU LP Savannah.
WRUU LP Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings Community Radio with Global Soul.
And here is Sebastian Messer playing live music for us. Take it away, Bass. Thank you, Bass. That was awesome. All right, Mark, you still there?
Still there. Great music.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Yeah, he's been playing, that's like the last 4 years? Yeah. He's been playing for the last 4 years, and he plays heavy metal music, but got him an acoustic guitar about a year ago, and he's become a picker since, so it's pretty cool. So we were talking a little bit. Can you tell me more about like your upcoming projects that you have?
Well, I have I have one novel that's due out later this year. We don't have a firm, definite release date yet. with the craziness of the world right now. But it is supposed to come out later in the year, and that is 324 Abercorn, which is my twist on the haunted house novel. And it takes place in Savannah because I love Savannah. Me and my husband come there at least once a year, sometimes more than once.
That's cool.
And I really loved writing that one because it was like for a year I got to vicariously live in Savannah. And I would sit at my desk with like maps and stuff out for, planning scenes and where people would be. But I love haunted house novels and movies, and I wanted to sort of play with that traditional haunted house novel, but give it hopefully my own unique twist to it. And that'll be coming out later this year from Crystal Lake Publishing, which has published several of my books before this. And they also recently bought a suspense novel I wrote called Before He Wakes, which will come out sometime next year. And that is a sort of a straight, fast-paced thriller type story. And that's also going to be from Crystal Lake Publishing. Last year, I released 2 separate short story collections, Bookhaven and Other Curiosities from Crystal Lake. And then in the summer of last year, The Daylight Will Not Save You, which came out from Unnerving Press. So, I have those things, and then, like I said, a couple of novels on the horizon.
Very cool. With your novel here in Savannah, what was the genesis for that?
It was actually, I was there on vacation. We were doing one of those walking ghost tours around the historic district, which my local friends have told me that locals just call downtown. But we were doing one of those tours. I don't think I had met Ryan yet, so I don't think it was his tour, but we had stopped at this house, which I thought was just gorgeous. It was a little run down. No one was living in it at the time, but they were telling the stories about it. It was supposed to be one of the most haunted houses in America. And I was just thinking, if I had the money, I would love to buy that house, fix it up, and live in it. And since, even though I like to write about these things, I lean toward the Scully side of things. Like, I'm more skeptical about those sorts of things. So I'm like, okay, it wouldn't bother me to live there. But then, so I got this idea of a writer who hits it big. He buys this house, he fixes it up. It's supposed to be haunted. He doesn't believe in that sort of thing. And gradually, things just start happening. Very small, subtle things at first, and then things start to escalate. But again, like I give it sort of I can't give it too much, but there's more than meets the eye. And so it starts off very traditional and then takes a very non-traditional turn. But it all started just from that tour, seeing a house that I thought, oh, I would love to live in that house.
That's cool because a lot of people ask, they'll say, where do you get an idea for your stories or your characters? And I think that's a great example of how you were on a tour and you saw this house that you would actually like to live in, and just kind of sparked that idea of what if I was a writer that hit it big, and then they moved to their ideal destination, but then there's a twist with the ghosts or whatever. So it's pretty cool, kind of putting your own spin on it. They say that Savannah is the most haunted city in the U.S. Speaking of Ryan Dunn, last year he was on a TV show. I was actually on the same TV show with him, and it was because of Ryan. It was on the TV channel's America's Most Terrifying Places, I think it was called. It's either America's Most Terrifying or the Most Haunted or something like that. It was on a TV channel, and they interviewed Ryan because they were talking about Moon River Cafe, and they were talking about there was this one story in there about a guy named James Stark, and he was kind of like this over the top, big mouth kind of guy and whatever. Well, anyway, he ends up getting into an altercation with a local, and they go back and forth, and he's I can't remember the guy's name, but he's kind of this guy Stark is harassing this other guy, and they end up meeting on the stairwell, and Stark reaches into like his breast pocket of his coat, and he's like fiddling around with something, and the other guy shoots him dead. And so they say that Stark is haunts Moon River Cafe. Well, that was the character that I got to play, and I had no idea. I'd never heard of the story before or whatever. Actually, I didn't even realize until I watched the episode of the character I was playing, like the prominent role that it was in the story. And because if you ever, and I'm not an actor, but if you ever do anything like that, folks, it's not always necessarily in sequence of the way that they're going to tell the story. And actually I got to play like 4 different roles in the shooting that day. So I played 4 different characters, and they're all non-vocal, but you had to character act, in the scene or whatever. So it was interesting to see that. But yeah, Savannah is considered to be like one of the most haunted places in the U.S. And Ryan has several. Not only does he have his Afterlife Tours company with his wife, Kim. Ryan has written, I think, 3 books now. I think he's put out his 3rd book about different ghost stories and things like that they've researched and whatever. And the reason why I like the way that Ryan and Kim do it is because they look at the historical facts behind the stories, and they do the other stuff too, but they try to present the facts to people. They try to let people know, like, hey, this is what we researched. This is what we found out about the true historical person behind this. What it was or whatever. And I think it's really interesting too, because like when you were talking earlier about how you like, the slow burn, so you got a chance to really get to know the characters. Like I didn't know much about the character James Stark, other than like the way that the director was, giving me like, okay, this is how you need to, act or whatever. I didn't really know anything about the guy. But afterwards seeing it, I was like, oh wow, I was playing blindly to it, but it worked out because of being able to work with the director and follow the director's, orders or whatever. But it's so interesting when you can take and you can piece together, different things and scenes or whatever, from you being on holiday or on vacation here, to say, hey, oh, I love, this is where I would love to live. And then you took it and incorporated it into your life as far as like, writing a book about it. So, in a way, even though you didn't buy the house and you're not living here, in a way, you actually made it a real thing, by making it into a book.
Yeah, and I mean, that's the thing I love about writing is like, I never know where an idea is going to come from.
Mm-hmm.
And it can be something so simple that sparks a thought that sort of ricochets off another thought, and then it becomes, even though it's imaginary and I made it up and it's just a story I've written down and it's on paper, that it becomes a thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like a real life event, but the story exists as its own concrete thing, and that's sort of exciting to me. And that's what I love about reading too. Like, I read a book, I know it didn't happen, but the experience of it is real to me in a way that it sort of can inform me. Especially like books I read when I was young, like they really help inform the person that I became as I grew up. So, yeah. I mean, I think there's something very powerful in storytelling, and there's a reason why all throughout history we just continue to tell stories, because there's a power there.
Oh yeah, I definitely agree. I think we're all story, telling beings. Everybody tuning in, you are listening to WRUU LP Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings Community Radio with Global Soul. For me, storytelling, it's all about emotions and that having that connection, with the human condition. And even though it might not physically be a real thing, it becomes a real thing in our mind because we're able to imagine it, or we're able to, visualize it. And a story in itself is, I think it has a lot, like you said, it has a lot of power because of that. And really, if you think, for me at least, this is the way I feel about it, is if you think about anything that's ever happened to you in your life, it's not physically happening right now, but you can relive that through storytelling, and you can share that experience with someone else through storytelling. You can't revisit and recreate. I don't care if it just happened 5 minutes ago. You're never going to be able to recreate it exactly the way it happened in that moment. So, but you can get it really close with a story.
And you can really, when I was growing up in the pre-internet age,
mm-hmm.
I lived in a very small southern town. I never left that town till I was a teenager. Like, that was all I knew. I didn't even know a very diverse set of people. So when I discovered the library and started checking out books, that's how I learned that there was a wider world out there, and there were different types of people, and there were different ways to live. And
mm-hmm.
it really opened me up in a way that I wouldn't have been opened up without books. So, I get very passionate on the subject of books, and particularly libraries, which I think can really help people who don't. It's a little different now in the internet world, but back then, especially, the library was my portal to the rest of the world.
Oh yeah. You can take a vacation anywhere you want to in a book.
Yeah.
I love sci-fi growing up. There's no way, we could do interstellar transport and, travel, but you can in a book, you can in your imagination.
And, I think a really good talent that some writers have is, whether they're writing any genre, even if it's science fiction or fantasy, you can ground it in a certain realism, even if it's futuristic or set on other worlds. If you make those worlds feel real, if you make the motivations of characters feel real, and with the kind of horror I write, I try to set it as firmly in the everyday world that we know
mm-hmm.
as possible, so that when these really otherworldly things start to happen, it's so much easier for the reader to go with it and suspend their disbelief, because there's an authenticity about just the foundation of the story.
Oh yeah, I agree. Like the Bloodthirsty, the first book that I wrote, it's set here in 1989 in Savannah, and I changed the names, obviously, but I wrote about different places that were here in Savannah, and I wrote about different things that were actually part of Savannah or whatever, just to have that real world kind of obviously vampires aren't real or whatever, but it's kind of okay, well, what if they were, what if how are they gonna act hokey and whatever? No, they're not gonna do that. They're gonna be just like you and me, everyday people trying to just live. Have you seen that show called What We Do in the Shadows?
I have not seen that yet. We've seen some ads for it, but we haven't watched it yet.
Okay, it's a comedy. It's like a horror comedy, but it's set the same way. It's what would it be like if these four vampires lived in an apartment together or whatever. So I like that sense of realism.
Yeah, I like that too, and because I set a lot of my books here in the area where I live,
mm-hmm.
the town where I grew up, the college I went to, or this area, and now Savannah, which I don't live in, but I'm familiar with. And I try to make it so that if you live there and you're reading that book, nothing's going to happen that's going to make you think, well, that's not how it is. So, when I was writing that Savannah book, I would, figure out, okay, so if this person is in this store and they go out, what direction do they turn to get to Forsyth Park?
I gotcha.
Because I like it. I read a book set somewhere I'm familiar with. I like when I can see, like, oh, they did their homework. They know. They're not just saying it's in this place, but we aren't doing anything to make it feel like this place.
Mm-hmm.
So, like I said, even if you're setting a fantasy novel or sci-fi thing, you can still make a foundation of realism within the context of the story so that the people and the emotions and all of that feel real.
I know, I'm not trying to knock anybody here, but I know somebody who did the opposite, where they set their stories here in Savannah, and they really had no idea anything about Savannah or the culture. And it was like, yeah, that is just not real. I mean, but someone who doesn't know anything about Savannah, they'd be like, oh, da, 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 da. You know, it's obviously fiction, but I feel like a good storyteller is going to do some more research, you know, like you've done, because they want it to feel authentic, and they want, you know, if you're not physically here, I mean, it's like if I were to write a story about Charleston, you know, I've only been to Charleston twice. I don't really know much about Charleston, but because of the internet, I can learn a lot about it. I could talk to people that are from Charleston and, you know, and find out about it, and you know, doing the research and doing the, you know, putting in the work. And I think that adds a whole, you know, authenticity layer to the story itself. So I think that's a great point that you bring up.
Yeah.
We've got about 3 or 4 minutes left. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Okay. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, we got about 3 or 4 minutes left. Where can people find your stuff, Mark?
All my stuff is available on Amazon, Mark Allan Gunnells. I do have my own author page, so you can just scroll through, and there's something for everybody on there.
And Allan is spelled Allan.
Yeah, it's Mark Allan, like Edgar Allan Poe, and Gunnells, Gunnells. Yeah. And I'm on blog at markgunnells.livejournal.com. I'm on Facebook and Twitter. I have an Instagram account called Make Reading Cool Again, and all I do is post pictures of books.
Okay.
That's all you're going to find on there.
I'm going to share. I've shared it a couple times already on my social media and my website and stuff like that. So I'll share it again when the podcast comes out. Should be doing that tonight.
Okay.
But, yeah, man.
And you can also find my TED Talk on YouTube.
Oh, very cool. Very cool. Well, I really appreciate you being on the show today, Mark, and sharing, you know, your thoughts about storytelling and writing and stuff like that, and even about the horror movies. I think it's really cool that, you know, you enjoy that slow burn, because I think I like different things for different reasons, and you know, so I like suspense and thrillers and stuff like that too. So it's pretty cool. So thanks a lot, man, for being on the show.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right, everybody, stay tuned, because up next you have Bill Cooper and the Savannah at Night crew. It's going to be a lot of fun. And I almost forgot, everybody. For everybody who celebrates, Happy Easter. So wanted to say that before we went off air. So, all right, thanks again, Mark, and I hope you have a great day.
Thank you. Happy Easter to you and yours.